This comes, with dire consequences to our habitat, but it also has economic detriment because plastics destroy our habitat and are associated with economic, environmental, and social damages. And we will talk about solutions a little bit more through Q&A and through Sophie's conversation. But what I just wanted to reflect on is what the good news about this is that if we design this linear plastics economy, this sort of system, we can also redesign it. We can come up with one that places emphasis on regeneration of plastic materials and keeping them in our economy. And so there's definitely lots of opportunities for us to have, to prevent plastic pollution. And what we really need to do is eliminate or reduce our sort of a reliance on plastics where it's not necessary, but also sort of shrink down those gray areas in this graph and expand on that green box of the recycling box. And Sophie, our sustainability wizard, will be able to expand more in that space later in our presentation. So we can now go to the next slide. Thank you, Emily. So plastic pollution from an environmental and scientific perspective, plastics are pollutant unlike any that we've ever dealt with, and they do come with some complex challenges around their sources, transport, and fate. All of these make it very, very difficult for us to understand the kind of impact that they're having on our oceans. So when it comes to their sources, one way, or fate, really, sources and fate, what we find is that plastics break down in the ocean. The larger plastics break down in the ocean along the continuum of sizes down to tiny little debris that we know as microplastics. And this is the type of plastics that we at OceanWise or at the Plastics Lab specialize in tracking in the environment. So that's one sort of mechanism that affects plastics in the ocean. We can also have microplastics getting into the oceans from the sources that we call the primary sources. This is where we have tiny little microplastics already designed to be sort of small at their production. And some of the examples include plastic fibers in our textiles or tire threads that are being shed from our cars as we're driving on the roadways. So in addition to these various sources, plastics also have very complicated leakage pathways to the environment. So we now know that our cities and our coastal and our coastlines account for the majority of the plastic pollution that we have at sea. There are some regional differences, and in some places, so for instance, the Pacific garbage patch, this is where we mostly see fishing gear as the major source of the plastic. So there are some regional differences in terms of the sources, but in general, our cities do act as pulses for plastic pollution to the ocean, to the environment. And we have yet to really fully quantify this. We have estimates, but they're not substantiated by data. And that's especially the case for microplastics, which we suspect can get into our watershed through urban runoff, wastewater, and various other urban leakage pathways. So we'll get to this kind of research that we do at the OceanWise in a moment. And of course, the major question for us is, what does this mean to the ocean and to the wildlife? So there's still a lot that we don't know, but what is certain is that marine wildlife ingests plastics, large and small. They're being ingested, they're being taken up by by different species within the ocean. Up to date, scientists documented that there's up to 300 marine species that are known to ingest large plastics. And on an individual level, that can lead to false satiation, suffocation, reduced growth, and so on. And of course, ultimately, death. Similar effects are being hypothesized for particle feeders, such as the zooplankton that you see in the slide here. This is a zooplankton from the Northeast Pacific that we studied not long ago. Also found this species to be taking up microplastics in the Northeast Pacific Ocean, majority of them being microfibers. That's what we know so far. But we have very, very poor understanding on the kind of the effects that that causes to both particle feeders, so tiny organisms and large organisms, and the entire ecosystems. So where is the plastics lab? What does the plastics lab do? Well, our mission is to conduct sort of a holistic research on the sources, transport, and fate of microplastics. So we're very much interested in how they're getting into our watersheds through, say, domestic laundry, how they are being transferred into the ocean. Where do they end up? We have active local programs to document microplastic contamination in British Columbia, in the Northeast Pacific, but also the Arctic Ocean. We're looking at their presence and position in food webs, including the Arctic beluga food web. And through very carefully designed laboratory studies, we're also interested in understanding what microplastic ingestion means to individual species, populations, and ecosystems. All of these different research elements or themes, as you will, are informed by forensic techniques that we employ at the lab through a method called the Fourier transform infrared spectrometry. And that technique is capable of telling us the source of the polymer, of the plastic polymer that we are encountering in a particular sample. So we would like to gain this big picture of the microplastic pollution. All of our research, of course, has the potential to inform interventions, better policies, regulations, consumer best behavior, and so on. But to be effective, we cannot do this alone. That's why all of the research that you see here and that you'll learn more about in the next few slides is done closely with leaders and partners in industry, government, and citizen scientists who are helping us to co-design this research and make positive changes across different sectors. Plastic pollution is an interconnected issue, and it cannot be solved by one group or one sector. So we really need to work together on this problem. And of course, what the Plastic Lab does is also putting all those insights into scientific publication, various outreach platforms, so that we can inform everybody, and by designing decision-making tools, help to inform decisions across these different sectors. So we can now proceed to the next slide, where I would love to share with you one of the major initiatives at the Plastics Lab called the Microfiber Partnership. And this is where we invite leaders in the apparel industry and associations, as well as the governments, to work together with us on the sources, transport, and fate of microfibers, plastic microfibers. These are some of the most common types of microplastics that we're encountering, especially in the Northeast Pacific Ocean and in the coastal British Columbia. So it's very, very important for us to better understand how they get there and what we can do to mitigate the issue. So the three core elements investigated under the initiative are experiments to better understand to what extent our laundry, textile laundry contributes plastic fibers to gray water, to what extent these microfibers are passing or leaking through our wastewater treatment facilities, and how can we best identify them and track them back to their source once they make their way into the environment. And we can proceed to the next slide. And yes, okay, so that's okay. This little graph at the bottom is a little snapshot of how we would identify a plastic material. It's an infrared spectrum of a polyester, and these little wiggles are essentially it's a little fingerprint, and it represents a molecular structure of a polymer, and this is how we identify various particles in the environment. Let's go to the next one. So what have we learned so far? We've been working on this issue for the last 2.5 years, 3 years, and there's been loads of insight that we gain into the issue. One being that microfiber shedding is a very complex problem. Our textiles have a wide range of shedding under a typical domestic laundry condition. Here on the slide, you can see one excerpt of a larger study to survey microfiber shedding from a variety of textiles. We're now looking at fleeces and jerseys. And as you can see, there's a huge variation, and that's because of their design. So textile design is very complex. You have various types of constructions, yarn types, mechanical treatments and chemical treatments, and so on. And in a nutshell, what we wanted to communicate with this is that by looking at this variation and how fiber shedding varies between different textiles, we can help to identify designs that shed less or very little microfibers. So this is where we're trying to understand the role of design in microfiber shedding. And we can now proceed to the next one. What have we learned at the wastewater treatment interface is that majority of microplastics that enter the wastewater treatment facilities are indeed composed of microfibers. What you're seeing here on the slide is a graphic from a secondary wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver that we investigated through a pilot study very recently. And we've learned that most of the microfibers and other microplastics are settling or caught by the treatment plant through the initial primary treatment process by simply just settling with the solids, and they end up in our sludges and biosolids. Nevertheless, there is a significant amount of microplastics that are getting through those facilities. And this is the observation or the finding not only coming from our studies, but from studies around the world. For this particular plant, we've estimated that an annual microplastic discharge represents approximately 30 billion plastic particles per year. And now what I would like to stress out is that while microplastics microfibers are some of the most common types of particles that are getting through, we are also seeing a myriad of other pieces and particles. So it's very, very important to be aware that whatever we put into our washing machines, toilets, and sinks is at risk of making its way into the environment. And one question I also wanted to raise here, something that's not understood very well, is that while wastewater treatment facilities catch majority of microplastics and microfibers, and they end up in our sludge, sludge and specifically the treated sludge, so the biosolids, are very frequently applied to land for agricultural purposes. Sometimes it's for land reclamation. So depending on the application of sludge in a particular area, microplastics are of course at risk of being reintroduced back into the environment through the biosolids, and we know very little about that at the moment. So it's definitely an active area of research for many people around the world. And let's proceed to the next slide. So what we were able to do with the research that we did on textile microfibers and wastewater is to put it into a bigger context. So this infographic shows estimates of for North American domestic laundry, North American household, pardon me. So we've essentially estimated an average amount of microfibers being released through laundry by a North American household. And then how many of those microfibers will eventually reach the aquatic environment after accounting for that 95 to 98% capturing efficiency of our wastewater treatment plants. And what you can see is that it's quite a significant amount that gets through. On average, we estimate 533 million microfibers being released every year through home laundry. And of that, 3.5 quadrillion, an insane number, makes its way into the ocean, and that amounts to 10 blue whales. So without a doubt, microfiber shedding, microfiber leakage into the environment is one of the more, pressing sort of study areas when it comes to microplastics. And let's get to the last slide, I believe. Yes, the last slide, which is what can we all do? I wanted to stress that there's still a lot that we must learn through research. There are severe research gaps across the entire spectrum of the problem, from source, transfer to sink. But without a doubt, and of course impacts too. But what we do know is that microfibers and plastics in general, they have this inherent longevity in them. They can persist in the environment for very, very long amounts of time. So we want to do our best to mitigate and to prevent what we're producing right now as much as we can, without trying to wait for the perfect answer and perfect solution. And there's certainly no one solution at play. So there's very, very simple and sort of common sense things that we can do. One is to, of course, think about how often we wash our clothes. Another one, a big one, is our clothing consumption. Our textiles come with a myriad of sustainability issues, not just fiber shedding. There are considerations such as water use, carbon dioxide production, and so on. So it's very, very important to consider the number of textile that you're purchasing, but also whether you're purchasing materials that last. And finally, we can also think a little bit about washing conditions. There's still a lot of unknowns in this area. We do know that colder temperature helps, front-loading machine helps. We know that detergent, promotes microfiber release, but there are still a lot of uncertainties there. So hold that space and keep yourself up to date with that research. And then finally, what you could do is apply a microfiber filter to your washing machine to trap some of those microfibers, and as a result, reduce that pressure on wastewater treatment facilities to retain those particles. So with that, I wanted to learn my portion of the talk and hand over to Sophie, and I'm happy to dive deeper into any questions that you might have towards the end of the conversation. And I also wanted to mention that the team, the Plastics Lab team, is in the back end. They are available for answering your questions through chat, but also may be able to chime in through the open Q&A later. So over to you, Sophie.
Hey everyone, thanks Anna, that was super helpful and informative. So right off the bat, I think it's really important that we kind of lay a foundation. And so that's why I've started this with, so we use plastics, now what? Because the reality is that we all use plastics. They actually have a ton of value to society. And I think we need to create this kind of like humility around our plastics use, and just realize that we are going to use them. They're inevitable. So how can we be really smart about using plastics? So with that in mind, the first point I pose to us is assessing what is necessary. So for OceanWise, we look at plastic use in our galleries, offices, kitchen, gift shop, supply chain, on our expeditions. The list goes on and on. And because there are so many areas that we can look at, that we decided that we needed to get really smart about our priorities. Whether you're a business or an individual, you can do the exact same with some simple steps that I'm going to go through today. So like I said, first we said no. We assessed what is necessary, and we said no to any unnecessary plastics. So this is many single-use items that you already know, like non-recyclable coffee cups, bags, bottles, tea bags, condiments, cutlery. The list goes on. But there are also many other sneakier ones that you might feel like you don't have control over, like plastic packaging, that actually you might very well have. So an example that I have for you today is that we actually worked with our suppliers to eliminate individual poly bags for both clothing and toys in our gift shop. So one example is we used to get these magnets for OceanWise, the little magnets for kids that they can put on their fridge. And the first order we got of hundreds of magnets came in individual little plastic bags. So every single magnet had a bag on it. And my team was horrified. And we're like, oh, what are we going to do? And we contacted the supplier and we said, hey, we don't want this packaged in plastic. This can't happen. This is completely unnecessary. And they said, okay, well, what if it gets wet? What are the liabilities associated? And we made a commitment then that we would take on the liability of damage from not having poly bags. And what we have found is that the cost to us to do that has been very minimal. And it's actually really interesting. So now going forward, when we communicate with suppliers, we put that in right away. So our communication to them is, hey, you're new to work with us. Something we really want to make sure is that there's no plastic packaging when you ship us an order. So that's just an example of something where we went, oh, what are we going to do? And we actually communicated straight to the supplier right away and said, hey, please don't do this. And now we have done that in all areas of what we are sending in. So we are doing it with clothes, toys. We're actually saying if you can send it with no packaging at all, that's great too. So it kind of just creates this conversation about what is necessary. Next slide. So just one more example of what is necessary. So on single use, we decided that there would be at the Vancouver Aquarium no plastic beverage bottles. So for us, we looked at it and we said, you know what, these are single use items. They're not actually necessary. We can use reusables, we can use refill stations. And we actually worked with Coca-Cola, our partner, to eliminate plastic beverage bottles. And at the same time, we told a story about healthy oceans and fresh water as well. So this is just a show. It just shows something we have in the galleries that tells us stories about this journey. And in the corner on the left bottom, you can see it's actually a refill station right there. And it's just saying that tap water is actually what we call it mountain juice at the aquarium, and that we have for the same price you can buy a bottle, a reusable bottle in our gift shop, and you can have that forever and use our tap water. So this is just another example of how you can, as an NGO, relatively small company, you can make a difference when working with very large and influential big companies to tackle unnecessary plastics. Next slide, Anna. Thanks. So when our first step is looking at what is necessary, and then our second step is actually understanding the life cycle of a product when we look at purchasing, and sort of where are the injection points for us that make sense. So next slide. So this is an example of the life cycle of a product, for example. So the idea of this at a high level is that when we look at a product, there are multiple different stages of a product's creation. So we have raw materials and design. So, thinking about how we're going to make this product and what are the actual components of that product. Manufacturing. So how do we make it, or the actual making of the product. Packaging and transportation. The movement and the readiness of this product, and then consumer use and end of life. So some of the questions that we would have are, can we buy a product that will last longer? Can it be reusable, compostable, or recyclable? Was it made with least harm to the environment as possible? These are all the kinds of things that sort of are whizzing around in my brain when I'm looking at a new product. So what we've done is that we actually make all our potential suppliers fill out a life cycle analysis questionnaire to assess their product's environmental impacts. And we won't work with suppliers if it's clear that they haven't thought about sustainable design or the end of life of their products. So I'm going to go through just some examples of how we look at each of these stages and how we either are looking at smart use of plastics or just building better products in general, and how the aquarium and Oceanwise actually are looking at this life cycle analysis. So for resource acquisition, which is really design and raw materials, we look at, are there more sustainable alternatives? So for clothing, that would be like organic cotton instead of conventional. For purchasing paper, for example, can we get recycled content, chlorine-free? Or even further, is there a way that if we have a product that conventionally uses plastic, is there a way that we actually can buy a different product or design a different product that eliminates plastic? So a good example of something that we've done is in our gift shop at the aquarium. We have these really cute plush stuffed animals, which are terrible for microfiber shedding, but as Anna knows. But what we have done is we've actually, most stuffed animals have nurdles in them, so we completely eliminated nurdles, but they also have those eyes on them, the googly eyes that make them look really cute. And what we learned is actually that's one of the first things in a stuffed animal that gets wrecked and ends up making the product obsolete. Like no kid is going to want a stuffed animal that doesn't have any cute little eyes anymore. So what we did is we actually asked the company that does this stuffed animals, we showed them a design and we worked with them for sewn-on eyes. So instead of having adding on these googly eyes, we actually create sewed eyes, and they look just as cute, but they actually have created way more durability for the product. And now we know the fear, I guess, is that those eyes will end up in the environment, and now those googly eyes will no longer be necessary and won't end in the environment. So this is just an example of where we had a conventional product and we went, hey, could we do this in a way that eliminates unnecessary plastic in the environment. So we designed plastic out, which is a lot of the time, and what Anna was speaking to earlier, are there ways that we can actually design plastic or more harmful materials out? Other things that we've done are, for example, on clothing, when you're buying a product, you have a like the barcode piece that has the price and some details about the product, and a lot of the time there's a plastic little connector to the garment. And we actually have done sewn on what they're called hang tags, so that you can just rip off the paper, recycle the paper, and then the thread is still on your garment. So instead of having a single-use, unnecessary piece of plastic. And then we also are always looking to showcase products that are using more sustainable design techniques in our gift shop. So if that's beeswax wrap instead of using saran wrap, those types of products we try to make available to people so that they can live more sustainable lifestyles. So from a design and raw materials, that's how we look at that. For manufacturing, we look at whether their processes are best for the environment. So do they use renewable energy? Are they manufacturing, is their manufacturing process creating a lot of unnecessary waste? So there are ways you can be more efficient about cutting textiles, for example, or your molds. When they have excess, do you reuse the excess, that kind of stuff? Or are you using chemicals that are leaching into the environment that are creating unnecessary harm? All of these things we take in consideration when looking at the life cycle of a product. And then further, packaging and transportation. We look at whether we're able to use less packaging or eliminate packaging altogether, as an example. So that would be like what I talked about before with those single poly bags. Can we get rid of those? Are they necessary? No. So we're always looking at ways in which, or can we work with our suppliers to have produce come unbagged? Those kinds of ideas. And then along with this, for consumer use or the use phase, we look at products that have, we ask the question of whether they have multiple uses. So could a product be repurposed? Or in the use phase, do they shed a lot of fibers? So, we made a transition away from fleece because they shed a lot of fibers. One example I have for can a product be repurposed or reused is in our food service that we have on site, both for catering events and cafeteria. So there are two great ways that we reduce waste for food service. And we ensure that, the first one is that we ensure that all ingredients can fulfill at least 2 recipes that we serve. So the idea behind this is that if one, for whatever reason, people aren't interested in having, hot dogs one day, that the same ingredients that go into hot dogs go into something else, so that we can ensure that we aren't producing waste, as we're minimizing the waste that we do produce. And we've seen this being extremely successful. And then additionally, we have another program where we actually take, so I don't know about you, but I like my bananas to not have any brown spots, as an example. And it turns out that our fruit bats actually love bananas that have brown spots, and that's how they eat them in nature. So what we have done is that if there is overripe fruit, overripe for humans, that is, not for animals, we actually give them to the Amazon gallery, and they are fed to our fruit bats, turtles, that sort of thing. So what I think is really neat about this is that we have looked at our system and gone, hey, we have these things that are showing up. Are there ways that we can actually reuse, repurpose some of the products that we're using on a day-to-day basis at the aquarium? And I think what's interesting is both the packaging examples that I gave earlier and the use that I'm talking about repurposing can be applied whether you're an individual at a grocery store, let's say, or a business purchasing products. So I can go and I say, what, can I buy this food without plastic around it? And I can also say, hey, if I don't use it tonight for what I thought I was going to use it for, is this something that I'm going to be able to use easily before it goes bad? So those are just some of the ways that we think about it, and I think it can be replicated very easily. So finally, for end of life, as you've kind of seen ahead of time, we first work to ensure that there's least waste as possible, so eliminating waste from the source, and use products that can be reused, recycled, or composted so that we end up with as little waste as possible. And then based on the waste streams that we cannot eliminate, we work with recyclers, composters, etc., to handle that waste responsibly. The nature of where we work means that there's many different people from all over the world coming to our facility, and they actually there's vastly different recycling practices just from one municipality to another, not even considering like one country to another. So one thing that we have done is that we work with a social enterprise called the Binners Project that sorts waste from our galleries to ensure that the maximum is recycled. And this is actually an amazing partnership where this is for binners in the Vancouver community that normally do this work unprotected. We are supporting them. It's a very win-win mutual solution type of endeavor because they are sorting our waste, which we want because we want to maximize what is recycled, composted, and reused. And they are able to have more stable, safe work than they would if they were sorting local waste unprotected, unsupervised. So it's been a great partnership, and essentially, and a great way to mitigate the problem of having all different countries coming to visit our facility who don't have the same waste practices and might think that they're following the right way for what they know because the recycling across the globe is vastly different. So one thing that we've also done is that we have provided extensive recycling streams for our employees and partners and do annual waste audits as well, which is where we can find some of these wins around repurposing. And this year we actually achieved an 82% waste diversion rate, which is getting to kind of that upper piece where things become harder and harder. But our ultimate goal is to be a waste-free facility at the Vancouver Aquarium. Next slide, guys. Thank you. So one decision we made was to offer recycling services for as many streams as we could and continue to research opportunities as they came along. So this is just to show you guys what we're currently recycling in our offices and at local depots, at least in BC and many parts in Canada. These are available to you. But I would say always check with your local municipality. For example, we have still not found a solution for diapers, which makes 11% of the Vancouver Aquarium's waste footprint. So we're still always researching and always trying to find opportunities as they come along. But as well, there's more recycling ability at the depot than we think sometimes. So that is encouraging to individuals and to businesses as well. Next slide, please. So we looked at assessing what's necessary, understanding the life cycle of a product, and then deciding where you can make an impact. As I said, we all use plastics, and sometimes it can be daunting when you're looking at in all the areas in which that you do use plastics. So I think it's important to look at the total cost of a product at each stage and to assess impact and decide where you're going to focus on. You don't need to tackle everything at once. Just pick one thing. We took small steps to eventually have a big impact, and we encourage you to just pick one and execute on it. Celebrate it, get excited about the achievement, and when you're ready for your next plastic challenge, to tackle that one again. Whether it be making your bathroom plastic free or eliminating plastic use from your supply chain or creating a circular product, pick one based on what you think is possible, and eventually you'll have an incredible impact and help us save the oceans. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Sophie and Anna. That was very insightful, and I'm sure everyone has lots of questions. There's a few that are coming up in the chat already, but if you don't mind, we'll just wait till the end so that everyone has a chance to speak first. Okay, so we're going to get into the panel discussion. Like I said, we have a few questions prepared for Sophie and Anna, and as Anna mentioned, there are a few from the Plastics Lab online as well. So if they'd like to chime in, please feel free. So we'll get started with the first question. So plastics research is in many ways still in its infancy. What are some of the areas of plastic research where work is still most urgently needed?
I'll start here. This is an extremely difficult question for me to answer because really, when it comes to particularly the microplastics, is across the spectrum that we really need to have a lot of research done. But if I had to highlight one area, I would say, or actually two. So one being, of course, the microfibers that we talked about. We really want to understand, you know, how different types of materials are contributing to the issue, and what can we do at the design side of the problem, and the company side, sort of the textile production and design. What can we do at treatment facilities to mitigate the issue? But I think the gaps there are significant gaps that we need to address in the area of the effects. So over the years, we have been able to unravel some understanding around, you know, the fact that plastics are ingested by wildlife. We know that from both field observations and lab studies. We've done, as a scientific community, studies with individual types of microplastics, such as microbeads of very specific sizes and shapes. But what we have yet to understand is the complexity and complex environmental scenarios around microplastics, because as we have seen in my earlier presentation, we're dealing with a soup of various shapes, sizes, and chemistries. So that's one thing. But also, the animals in the environment, they're exposed to multiple stressors. So we don't really know how microplastics are working with those other multiple stressors collectively, and whether you know, they are more harmful in that way. So definitely lots of work to do in the area of effects. And maybe if anybody from the Plastics Lab, if you want to raise hand to answer this question, you're also welcome to chime in here.
If there's anyone else who would like to add to it, please feel free. You can also chime in at the end if there's something that you think about later. Sophie, did you have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, just quickly, I think it's important that we recognize the need for research and technology to recycle plastics properly. And from most of plastics it's being downcycled at this time. It's not actually being made back into what it originally was. So there's a huge need for that. And to Anna's point, I think it's important to understand where plastics are coming from so we can reduce from the source. And actually, one thing that I find really challenging is learning how I'm going to motivate individuals and businesses to effectively change. So those are my three.
Definitely some great points. We'll move on to the next question. So as you mentioned, Sophie, the Vancouver Aquarium has achieved a really high waste diversion rate. So how or what tips would you give other organizations who are hoping to achieve the same thing? You had one or two major things that you would recommend.
Yeah, so I would say first eliminate what comes into your office, home, etc., and know whether it can be recycled or composted before you purchase it. So right away, you're in control of what comes into your space. So be smart about what that is, and then make sure that you are sorting your waste properly and well, and reach out to experts when you're not sure. For example, in BC, Recycle BC has great resources. And most municipalities across Canada have Q&As for you on what's recyclable in their jurisdiction. So those would be my tips.
Thank you. And then the next question I think might be more for Anna, but again, Sophie and Plastics Lab, please feel free to chime in. So Anna, you mentioned this a little bit before, but what would you say are maybe top 2 or 3 major sources of plastics to the natural environment?
Yeah, so well, the sources, of course, we talked about our cities as sources, but also a pathway for microplastics. So really, common sense things such as litter is something that is one big source. So anything we can do to reduce litter in our cities, on our beaches, that eventually gets converted into these tiny pieces that are extremely difficult to extract from the environment and trace. And we really don't know actually where the majority of the plastics that does get into the ocean, where it is. We cannot account for it right now with our surveys. Relatively speaking, to all the plastics that are being produced and sort of estimated to be discharged from land, we're only finding a very small percentage of it in the ocean. So it's called this so-called missing plastics phenomenon. So it's very, very difficult to deal with this problem once it's make its way into the ocean. So anything we can do to intercept our plastic litter at the urban interface, I would say that's very important. We talked about microfibers. These are important sources of primary microplastics. Sometimes they're referred to as secondary microplastics. There's a little bit of confusion among scientists and disagreement about how we are treating different categories. But, they are still a big player for sure. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Definitely. That's why it's so important to do cleanups when it's safe to do so, to remove all of that litter from the environment.
Very important to manage our own footprint as individuals, knowing that, as Sophie mentioned, not all of the plastics that we recycle actually can end up in the environment. Some of it leaks into the that we try to recycle does not always get recycled, or it gets downcycled, or it leaks into the environment. So it's very important to know what we can do at the individual level, and as communities as well, working with our municipalities to have better collection systems, identifying hotspots in the city for where this is occurring, and what can we do through green design, for instance. So green design applied to trap various road debris in some areas and pollutants. And so there's an opportunity to do something similar in the area of microplastics, for instance. So there are various, I get really excited about this because I see a lot of possibilities for plastics, and both on the research side and the innovation side. So yeah, I think there's a lot we can do, and I have many different bucket lists. I'm sure Sophie does as well. to identify what we can eliminate, innovate, you know, change. It can be quite satisfying, although sometimes feels like a large problems. But as Sophie mentioned, if we break it down into lists and work in step log, I think we can really amplify and we can make a huge change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. So in Canada, single-use plastic bans have been discussed at municipal, provincial, and federal level. Which items do you think are most necessary to ban or place legislation and policy around, and maybe which are better left alone, at least for the time being? So I guess, in other words, what plastic products do we really not need in society, or that we could get rid of easily?
Yeah, so I think I might be a bit hardline on this one. And I would say that all unnecessary plastics should be banned. People adapt. And I mean, my life has adapted fully, and I'm no worse off. If anything, I'm better off. I would say that's like plastic bags, straws, styrofoam. We're already seeing these bans happen around the world. I think it is important to mention that during this pandemic, obviously some of that has changed. And I think it's very important that we respect both the health workers and the Ministry of Health on their decisions, especially when it comes to reusables not being allowed at this current time. I think it's important that we recognize that that is for our safety and for our health. And I hope that in future, if things go back to normal, that we are able to find ways to still use reusables in a safe way. But what I think is actually more important than what is necessary to ban is actually for producers to be responsible for their waste and packaging. And I see a future where plastics, the future of plastics is to make the producer responsible, so that we have effective ways of recycling these products. So whether that's through enhanced EPR, we shall see, but I actually think that is potentially more meaningful than banning it, is to make it really, making producers have to be really smart about using it.
That's a great point. Thank you, Sophie. Anna, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Sophie has said, but perhaps I have a slightly different, I guess, approach. My preference is on the word not ban, but reduction strategies. So some materials, you know, they do come. When we're looking for bans and replacements, we're also concerned about what we're going to replace with and whether it has a different sustainable issue, right? Such as water and so on. So for some materials, you know, those are very important questions, and that may be what's prohibiting a very proactive change in this space. But I think if we can make a list of, as you mentioned, Emily, what are some of those materials that are completely useless right now? We really don't need them in our society, and it comes at no cost to eliminate them. And microbeads and cosmetic products are a great example because they're completely useless. And so those are eliminated. Where I would hope to see a little bit of help from our governments is in the control of excessive packaging. There's some conversation around, oh, that should come from the industry should work towards that. But at the end of the day, in the modern world that we live, the industry is driven by profits. So they're not going to be motivated by designing a product unless it is cheap and it is in demand. So we really need some help, either as we rise as a community to put that demand on our industry by purchasing power. That's very, very difficult, of course, that takes time. And of course, through government, by demanding our government to set some practices in or frameworks, better frameworks, so that the industries are not only incentivized by profits, but by making products that are good for our environment.
Thank you guys both. We'll move on to the next question. There we go. So what would you recommend the individual consumer do in their day-to-day lives to support both the environment and to reduce their waste and plastic footprint?
When we talked about this, Emily, we said we could pick one thing. So I'm picking one thing. And it is, when I say I'm picking one thing, I'm actually telling you guys to pick one thing. So pick one aspect of your life: kitchen, bathroom, closet, toys. If you're an individual, if you're a business, pick an aspect of your business and eliminate plastic in that one area. So for example, I made my bathroom plastic free, but that didn't happen overnight. So now my challenge is, okay, how am I going to do that at the grocery store? But these small steps do have a big impact. And I would say once you achieve it, celebrate your goal and empower others to do so as well.
Yeah, I definitely what Sophie just said. And for me personally, the journey has been with understanding my own behaviors at first and identifying what are the biggest, as a family, really, what is our biggest challenge, where are, our biggest footprint. And I had to work on my partner for some time, and for us to both make sure that we always have this reusable bag with us every time we go to the grocery store. And it was surprisingly very easy change in the end. It required us to always have something in the car initially, a reusable plastic bag in the car, a few in different kind of places where we are. But over time, it just became an instinct almost, right? So identifying where your biggest players are in every day is super important. And for me, it's reusable coffee cups, beverages, and the plastic bags. Those are the three ones that have been quite important for me. And the next steps, I'm very excited to hear about Sophie's bathroom audit. I'm going to take some tips from her after this call, but also about the waste audit that the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup is putting together. I'm very excited to try this out myself once it's available.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people can take those tips that you've both recommended and implement them within their own lives, which is really great. And then the last question that we have today is, what keeps you motivated? Why do you come back to work every day? What do you love about your work and what you're working on? And where is there hope for change in this field?
Okay, I can take my one, I get one. So I guess for me, it's just that I'm really amazed by all the resilient people out there and the solutions that are showing up. And I think it's really exciting to see people's awareness growing and that expectations are changing. So for me, I would say that it has been a slow process to speak with your dollar, but I actually think there is a lot of action towards that, and that there's a lot of creativity in the space of finding these solutions. So that's exciting for me.
Similar for me, I do get a lot of buzz from all the community spirit, especially on our coast. The green kind of mindset is really empowering. On a personal or sort of the background side of things, as a scientist, I'm naturally drawn to problem solving, and I see just so many possibilities for plastics. So I have so many different lists of all the things that can be done. And I think, unlike other environmental challenges, there really are some common sense and obvious things that we could do. So I'm almost excited and motivated by tackling some of the obvious challenges in front of us. And the innovation side of things is also super exciting. We come across various young entrepreneurs and all kinds of people who have come up with great ideas. And you don't have to have background in business. Everybody uses plastics. Everybody understands them. So it's really cool that we as a global community are coming together to help identify solutions. Yeah, that's my personal blurb.
Thank you guys so much for answering those questions. We've received quite a few questions in the chat already, so I think what I'll do is read them out, and then Anna, Sophie, or anyone on the Plastics Lab, please chime in if you feel like you have something to add or can answer that question. So the first one we have here. So do you think that we will revert to a single-use society because of this pandemic and the fear of contamination?
I don't think, I think there will be maybe a slower transition, because a lot of programs were starting to get up and running, especially with reusable like mug share programs for cities and that sort of thing. So I think there will definitely be a slowing of that, but there will be more stringent regulations on those reusables. So maybe you will have reusable bags that are allowed to be used, but they have to go through laundry, and it'll be up to the grocer if they want to do that, so that they can actually, upon you entering, you get a bag that is reusable and you drop it off the next time you come back to the store or whatever. Those are some things that I could see, or the health regulations on reusable mugs will be very different, and they have to come from the store itself, those kinds of things. So I think it might make us have to rethink our models, but I would say that is making our models more resilient to future issues. So that could actually be a win for us.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would add to this, maybe with a philosophical reflection, is that for me personally, this has been a very challenging time for everyone. But it's interesting the space that that happened by necessity of just like being able to slow down and think about what we're doing. So I feel like certainly in my circles, there's a lot of conversation around, well, look what's happening to our world. You know, what about, this is like a trial for something that might happen with climate change, for instance. Like, how are we going to respond as a community to those threats and challenges? And so I feel like there's maybe a space as well to have a discourse that's a bit more meaningful and less, you know, go, world is going at a really fast pace. So I hope so. I hope that we will use this as an opportunity to come up with some good things.
Absolutely. So the next question I think might be for you, Anna, and the Plastics Lab. So in your microplastics research, have you found that linear shaped microfibers in particular have a more negative effect on marine organisms' health than other more circular shaped microplastics?
Linear shaped versus circular shaped microplastics. So we haven't, as a lab, we haven't looked into, we're still learning about the different types. It really comes down to who in the food web you are studying. So that's when the size becomes very important. So I don't have a clear answer on that one. So it's not only the circularity, but also the size, and you know, and how long these things are going to come into play. So no clear answer on that, I'm afraid.
No problem.
Yeah.
Matthew Watkins here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I'm with the Plastics Lab as well, an environmental technologist. And my area is I focus on laundry a lot, so the microfibers that are coming from laundry. And we do know that like zooplankton, for example, tiny critters in the sea, are confusing microfibers for food, and so those fibers can get tangled in their feeding appendages. So that is like one situation with one like type of organism where that the long shape seems to be harmful. But yeah, like Anna said, I think it probably depends a lot on the species. It's sort of case by case.
Yeah, and to add to Matthew's comment as well, it's it's very rare that these things will that the animals are exposed to individual types. So it's going to be probably an additive or compound, what's the word I'm looking for? Collective kind of impact rather than one or the other microplastics. We really need more research to do in this space.
Great, thank you guys both. The next question is about the slide with the amounts of microplastic pollution from household and sewage. If you'd like, Anna, please let me know if you want me to go back to it to refer to, but how is that measured? The numbers are huge.
I'm very sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, so with the slide with the amounts of microplastic pollution from household and sewage, how are those numbers measured? And then
So those, yes, great question. So those estimates are based on, those are extrapolations from the research that we do. And Matthew can give you a little bit more technical detail as to how he captures microfibers in home laundry. But essentially, those estimates are based on, us measuring the microfibers that were generated, that were shed into laundry wastewater by individual fabrics. And then we also, so we know the amount of microfibers and the weight of the lint. We can then make some assumptions about, the frequency of laundry that occurs over the year per household, scale that up to household in North America, and that's how we come up with these estimates. For the wastewater treatment plant, it's a little bit more complicated. It's a lot of work, a lot of technical work. And Stephanie, who's on the call, may be able to shed more light into it. She's our engineer and she studies wastewater treatment plants more carefully. But what we do at the wastewater treatment plant, we have these special devices, special filters and pumps that are collecting a volume of wastewater at different stages. We then take that into the lab, clean up the filters, remove as much as we can any biological material that's in the sample. That's very, very important. And reduce that to the levels that allow us to characterize microplastics, both under the microscope and through this technology that we know as FTIR. And right now we are doing this this form of research that spans an entire year, because there's a considerable amount of variability in terms of the conditions that our wastewater treatment facilities are experiencing. We're doing laundry, we're not consistently doing laundry at the same time. There are rainfalls that are very important players when it comes to the volumes of liquid that wastewater treatment plants are processing. So there's definitely a lot of variability that has to be accounted for. But those numbers for the efficiency of the wastewater treatment plant to capture microfibers are based on a pilot study where we took samples from different stages of the wastewater treatment plant. And then we essentially estimated how much is retained versus emitted. Does that help answer this question?
I believe so. Yep, yes, it does. But if Matthew, if you had anything to add, please feel free. Otherwise, I will move on to the next question.
Go ahead. Short answer is like filtration. We're filtering the water, and so using either like say a 20 micron or a 50 micron filter, and particles that are bigger than that are getting filtered out, and then we're able count them, or in the case of when I'm processing lint samples from laundry wash water when we're doing laundry tests, because I know that pretty much everything is coming off of the textile, sampling from the drain hose of the wash machine. I can also just like weigh the lint as opposed to having to count the individual fibers.
Thank you. So I think this next question might be for Sophie. So regarding the recycling streams, does the Vancouver Aquarium have a list where we can find locations to recycle less common items? For example, I know London Drugs takes soft plastics, but I would love to know which store or facility takes things like pens or foil wrappers.
Yeah, so if you're in BC, then Recycle BC will tell you basically they have a search engine, and you can put in your item, and it will tell you where your drop-off locations are available. I am not sure about pens and foil bags. That would definitely be municipality to municipality. But for things like soft plastics, definitely the municipality should be still recycling them for the most part. We have seen, obviously, with the changes in our recycling having to be certain end recyclers have been eliminated, obviously, with China banning import of recycling. So we have seen some disruption for those supply chains. But like I said, I would encourage you to go. It's very based on whatever municipality you are in. So we don't have a resource guide for that, but if you search your municipality and recycling systems, it should come up. And for BC, Recycle BC is the one I would definitely recommend you use.
Thank you, Sophie. We'll do a couple more questions. I apologize for going over time, but there's lots of really great questions. So we'll just do a couple more, and thank you for sticking around for the extended version. So another question we have is, how do you dispose of microfiber filters in washing machines without them ending up in the landfill?
Matthew, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So how do you dispose of washing machine filters? A lot of it depends on the filter you're using. So like, for example, the Lint Lover is one that's available here in Canada. It's in Eastern Canada. And then down the south in the States, a common one that's been around for a little while now is called the Filtrol. And both these systems are reusable filters, not actually disposing of the filter. But so what you do is you would just like clean off the filter and then discard the lint in the garbage. In most cases, there is like one company out there that is being working on lint filters that they take back after use, and then they would actually recover the lint. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the name. But yeah, generally you would just be disposing of the lint and then reusing the filter, depending on the device you're using. And at least as removing it from the wastewater stream, so it's not going into the ocean, it's perhaps going to a landfill or it's being incinerated.
Great, thank you, Matthew. We'll do two more questions, and then I apologize if I didn't get to your question. I'll put up our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to either myself, Anna, or Sophie directly. So the next question we have here is, some folks argue that reusable bags are less environmentally friendly than single-use plastics, such as grocery bags, due to the production of the bag. Can you speak to the science behind that?
I don't know if we can speak to the science of it because we haven't done any science ourselves on it. But I would say that depends on, as a consumer, how you use the bags. So you're only in control of you. And you can make a decision to buy a reusable bag, or where I'm seeing bag libraries show up. So a lot of people have extras, so they're giving them away. And you can use that bag for as long as you can until it breaks down, and then you can recycle it properly. And that's, I would say, depending on how people are using the bags, maybe they have more of a negative footprint, but you have full capability and responsibility to have that stat actually be not the case. So it's all about how you use and responsibly use these items, right? Because it's still a lot of reusable bags are plastic bags at the end of the day. So if you're not being responsible or smart with the use, then sure, it could be more damaging to the environment. So it's actually empowering. Take that on and make sure that doesn't happen. That's what I'd say to that.
Yeah, if I can chime into this one, I certainly agree with Sophie on this one. It's not as black and white as this or the other. The context is very important. So sometimes we like to think that we should just all switch to natural products right away and just replace every single plastic we have in the house. But let's just think about that. Maybe it doesn't need replacing. Maybe you can reuse it. You will have an environmental impact if you decide that a material that is perfectly fine, it's made out of plastic, it has some life in it, you can use it, but you're going to replace it with something different. Plastic is not a bad material. It's really how we use it is bad. So it's going to require some individual thinking about your needs and how you use, as Sophie mentioned, and how smart we are with it. And I definitely think there are a lot of materials in rather than producing new ones, we can certainly look to ways to use what we have already, and that will definitely have better environmental outcome than generating a new material.
Yeah, and to Anna's point, just quickly, I think it's also important that we look at, like, products have, like I talked about, raw materials, for example, and there are impacts of those raw materials. And I think it's important that we don't go, plastic is bad, we should use a different type of material. We have to look at within different material columns, let's say, what is the best that we can use in each of those? So what's the best paper-based product that I can use? What is the best plastic-based product I can use? It's not as black and white as get rid of plastic, go to this other thing, because there might be all sorts of other environmental impacts of that.
Absolutely. Thank you guys both. And last question we have here today. Somebody says that you mentioned about diapers. They're also curious about dog poop bags. Is there any current research and alternative bags that are not single-use plastics?
Yeah, I can take this one. So I actually spoke to Metro Vancouver, for those of you in BC, recently about that. And so I can only speak to Metro Man because I actually asked because I'm a new dog owner. And unfortunately, no. Unless you want to scoop with a shovel and hold on to it and put it into the garbage without a bag, that is your best case. Or if you live on a luxurious farmland somewhere, then yes, you could put it into the forest in your own home. But if you live in an apartment like me, that is not an option, and unfortunately, that is a reality at this time. They haven't been able to figure that out. We are seeing more only dog poo trash cans, so they're putting it separate, but that's more new and up and coming, and really only around parks that I have seen. But so unfortunately, no, I do not have any good on either diapers or poo bags.
Maybe in the future, who knows? Well, unfortunately we'll have to leave it at that just because of timing, but I wanted to post our contact information here. Like I said, please feel free to reach out to any of us if I wasn't able to get to your questions. And just so everyone is aware, we are doing a webinar series. We have one a week. So the one that we have coming up next week will actually be in French, and we'll be talking about our 30 dozen. So if you're interested in that, please do sign up or check out our website where we'll be listing our other webinars after this one. And please sign up. So thank you guys so much to Anna and Sophie, especially, as well as the Plastics Lab, for signing on and giving a really great presentation and answering all of these questions. We really appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.